was a dark night in Gotham City when four friends got together to record episode 100 of the I Am the Night podcast, where we pay tribute to Arlene Sorkin and go through one of the greatest episodes of the animated series and one of the greatest comic books featuring the Joker and Harley Quinn of all time. As always, with me is Adam.
Hello, guys. Pleasure to be back talking about some slice of comic book history.
Absolutely. And joining us for the third time is James, and for the second time is Brad. Brad, how are you? And welcome and thank you for joining us.
Good to be back. Thanks for having me again.
Happy to.
Always. Oh, very good. Saw what you did there. Perfect. So yeah, this is Mad Love, Harley Quinn's origin story, and the first and only time a comic book based on the animated series was actually adapted straight into the animated series. And as far as comic book adaptations go, this is probably one of the most faithful ever. A couple of things were left out, but necessarily so, I believe. But enough from me. Let's start. Let's do this alphabetical. So Adam, Brad, James. So Adam, your first thoughts on Mad Love?
Well, I've seen a lot of adaptations across all of the different movies and TV shows I've ever read or reviewed or written about for various reasons. Something so sincere and so accurate, like down to the dialogue choices, so much so that in other media taking on this topic of the origins of Harley Quinn, some of the dialogue was used again. Some of the little stuff like "Call Me Harley," everyone does, conflating the Joker's madness with Batman, and just like little turns of phrase were reused in some of the Arkham games. But of course, Paul Dini was allowed to do that. It's not plagiarism if you rip off yourself. So this is defining of the character and has always been so. So yeah, just seeing it so handled so well was amazing to me, honestly.
Yeah, I agree. I think I came to the animated series a little late. So my first intro to Harley was through the comics. And seeing this and reading the issue just takes it all back to what motivates the character. And you just realize that, Adam, like you were saying, those things, those lines that have stayed kind of in every retelling of her origin, you realize how iconic this particular story. I gotta say, and I'm sure this is something that we'll get into, but boy, I really felt sorry for Harley in this episode.
As did we all. What about you, James?
This for me was always a chicken and egg of which came first, the comic or the animated series episode, because I was a kid. So I couldn't remember how far back it was before I'd seen one or read one, but I knew that they were pretty close, like, to each other. And to think that the comic came out 6 years before the episode?
Yes, indeed, yeah.
Because it had the old animated style from the original animated series, and then they adapted it for the episodes. And so little the differences, like you expect they took out just for time. But it's such a loyal adaptation. And like Adam mentioned, the Arkham games, which Paul Dini had a hand in writing as well. And even David Ayer's Suicide Squad movie, you see it.
Definitely, yeah.
To think that this character debuted in a cartoon and has now been labeled as one of the most popular female comic book characters ever is wonderful. And it all came from this episode, I'd say, to win the hearts of the fans.
Absolutely. I mean, Jim Lee has gone on record to say that alongside the trinity of Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman, the fourth pillar of the DC universe is now Harley Quinn, due to her popularity, due to her stakes, due to her evolution as a character. And I actually find that hard to argue. I know several people at DC Comics News may hate that fact, but I do believe it's a fact. But like you said, Paul Dini can't rip off himself. The story is by Paul Dini and Bruce Timm. Scripts by Paul Dini, just like the comic, and it's directed by animated series mainstay Brooke Lukic, who did an incredible job, I feel. What do you make of the script and the direction, Adam?
They focus really well on it being a Harley-centric story. It could have been, sure, it was like keeping itself faithful to the comic itself, but there was definitely an opportunity for it to be like a traditional episode of the animated series where they could have had like Robin and Nightwing or even Alfred sort of show up in the fringes, but that would have been distracting. I think we got exactly the right focus where it needed to be, because ultimately this Harley Quinn origin story is a story that's several episodes, several seasons in the making. People just sort of saw her as this like throwaway like lady clown thug, but then just her mystique and her lure and her best friendship, as it was at the beginning with Poison Ivy, sort of tickled everyone's imaginations. So people were really curious to see where she came from, and of course, here it is.
Absolutely. What about you, Brad?
Yeah, I agree, and this kind of shows what is so special about the series is the fact that it wasn't a very Batman-centric a villain that maybe up to this time didn't even get time in the spotlight. And it's safe to say that maybe had this episode not premiered, if they not did this episode, the character might not be as iconic or the fourth pillar, as you say. So I don't think you can overstate the importance of the story, and the direction was amazing too, just because it really, to make you feel so much for a character in an animated format is incredible, and in a show that was aimed at kids. So it's a pretty momentous achievement.
Crazy.
Hearing the episode is for kids. That's what I've been thinking this whole time.
Yeah, not really.
Like
this episode,
the levels, yeah. Like, and God, I love talking to you guys. I agree with everything everyone said, but I'll address it. Like the script and the direction. Like I read and watched them very close together this time around for this, and slight differences you can tell have happened because of who's voicing the characters, because of who's going to be the center focus. Like the line when the Joker is in the dentist office and he's leaving and he says, "May the floss be with you."
Fantastic.
Mark Hamill saying that, obviously the Skywalker, and that wasn't in the comic. So you wonder if Mark Hamill in a little recording booth thought, you know what would be funny?
Honestly, probably.
Yeah.
And who could argue with it?
It still blows my mind that that's Mark Hamill.
Yeah.
I would never have guessed.
Nah. That's the amazing thing is sorry everyone. The amazing thing is, like, when Jim Gordon goes into that doctor's office and it sounds like a mild-mannered guy until he puts on the face of it and turns around. That's just his range, and that's just not the kind of voice acting range you'd ever expect from Luke Skywalker. It's so unexpected but so welcome.
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways that his role as the Joker did more for his career than Luke Skywalker, because he did show that range. And I think it blew everybody away back in the 90s when they first heard it.
I mean, hearing it, anyone who hadn't read the comic could easily be misled into thinking, who is this? Because it doesn't even sound like Mark Hamill. It sounds like a completely brand new, like you said, Adam, mild-mannered character who's just come in. And it's the same with Arlene Sorkin's Harleen Quinzel. She sounds cool, calm, collected, deeper, bassier, completely a million miles away from Harley. And the amount of people who are responding to the tribute we put on Dark Knight News for Arlene, who didn't even realize that Arlene named Harleen, it still blows my mind. I can't believe that people did not know that. But from this episode alone, and it's heartbreaking as we've just lost her. This is Arlene's masterpiece. I mean, this episode is just amazing. Like you said, Brad, James, they took scenes out. There's a whole montage with Bruce and Alfred in the cave at the beginning of the comic book, which isn't in here, not missed. There's a complete montage with Gordon breaking into the Piranha Tank nightclub place to help Batman. Again, not needed at all. And the actual story beats, though, are exactly the same. So when I say it's the perfect, most true adaptation, it really is. Now,
there's three bits that are in the comic that they left out, I feel, because they might have been just a smidge too mature. There's Harley getting into like the college and like making her way by
absolutely
romancing the dean. There's Harley's vision of her future with the Joker, with JJ, little mini Joker.
Kind of missed that bit, yeah.
And then there's her fantasy about Batman brutalizing Joker, which shows him throwing him into the chemicals. Like all of that stuff in the comic, you're reading it, you're like, whoa, okay.
We get a glimmer of Batman throwing him into the Ace Chemicals plant.
Yeah.
I think another thing that was omitted was a similar fantasy where they get all together and she's like, "Oh, you," but they still look exactly the same. They just look all wizened.
Yeah.
And she's got like the old lady bandana, but it's still red and black.
Yeah, I didn't miss it. I didn't miss the parts. I think that the episode worked fine. And I think that's a credit to both Eileen and Paul Dini, because he knew what to cut. And she just brought so much emotion and heart to the character that to me, those parts were not missed.
The heart and soul of the story is identical, almost beat for beat to the comic. And that really surprised me, because this is one of my favorite comics of all time. It's an Eisner Award-winning book, but it is dark as hell. And I'm still asking myself how this got through the censors at Warner and at Cartoon Network and was transmitted, because even though it's slightly toned down, the whole rev up your Harley, the walking around in the negligee, the violence, the way he strikes her, the way he throws her out the window, it's heart-wrenching. It's really deep. How do you guys cover that in your own minds?
I'm aware of a couple of other very grown-up scenes that were animated and voiced that didn't make it into the original episode. I'm not too sure if they're appropriate to say here, but yeah, let's just say that they're the after-school special. But it's fair enough to say that certain things didn't make the cut because it had to still be appropriate for little kids, but it still played with a lot of the truth of the origins of these characters in a way that we saw them just naturally in the original comic story. So there were some things that needed to cut for the sake of things, and needed to cut for time, but otherwise made a lot of sense either way. So a necessary concession, I think. Yeah. Brad?
And this could be something that could be up for debate, but I think some of those, the violence and the way he treats her, today, I don't think those would get through the censors.
Absolutely.
And, is it better to have that conversation or to not put that in the episode? That's the big question, because I think it's already sparked conversation between us. So it's, and there has certainly been a lot of talk about the toxic relationship between Joker and Harley in the wake of the Me Too movement. And this is a great episode to study. I think you could probably do a college lecture on this episode and the time it was put out and what would happen if it was put out now and what does that say. So yeah, and I may have said that it's was aimed at kids, but there's definitely a lot more going on. Not only in this episode, but in the whole series. And I was almost more shocked at the negligee than I was at the violence, because the violence still felt, and I as brutal as it was, it still felt a little cartoony. And I don't want that to take away from how horrible it was, but I was a little bit more shocked by the sexual aspect than the violence, and that's kind of crazy to think, and that would happen. But that's the way society is.
Absolutely.
I'm a bit the opposite. The violence for me, like, because whenever I see on social media people post a picture of Harley and Joker and it's like couple goals, relationship goals, and I'm like, that is the toxic relationship. In this episode alone, he swats her like a fly, like with a backhand, grabs her hair when she finishes one of his jokes, throws her out of a 5th floor window, like, and it's just the definition of toxic. And he manipulated her, like even Batman tells her he manipulated her, like, because you see when she's first being introduced and Dr. Leland is saying like these people will eat a rookie like you for breakfast. You hear him whistling his own theme as soon as she says the word rookie. So he's like, that's me. Here we go. This is going to be a doddle. And unlike most of his other victims, she sticks around because she's now a part of it, but like the violent part, like with the sexy negligee, it's like that part. It makes me chuckle now. But there was also another episode where she wants to celebrate their anniversary, which mad love. All the events happen on April Fool's Day as well. That's something. There's a fun tidbit for you. But their anniversary, when she's like in a giant pie.
Yes.
Saying, happy anniversary,
Yeah.
Mr. J. She sings the song, let's take the night off and play. Like, these have gotten through so many censors. And as a kid, like, you're laughing because obviously it's a woman in a pie. And in this episode, like, she's like, I've got the whoopee cushion. So I remember laughing.
Yeah,
Like,
I was like, how did they get that past?
Absolutely.
I was going to bring up the whoopee cushion part. That would be what? Oh, okay.
It's insane. Yeah.
It is. But that's also the merits of the rest of the story made the rest of it somewhat excusable to the people that with the powers that be to sort of control what could go on screen and what couldn't. I think a lot of it is to sort of communicate how crucial these morality plays are, because that's I think a way to read it. Their dynamic, their relationship is a morality tale for those who shouldn't let themselves get caught in that kind of environment. And if you're aware of yourself in that place or someone you care about in that place, you need to try and help them escape, much in the way that Batman tried to, by sort of shaking her out of apathy and realizing it for at least a little while. And for him to sort of call the Joker out on it, so that he should be more appreciative because she did a better job of taking me down supervillain style than he ever did.
Puddin'.
I think a lot of that is a way to teach kids in a way to recognize that sometimes, because it looks like that they're a loving couple and in love, they're not. It's not necessarily happy families here. So they need to be aware of that things can go bad, and they dress it up with bright colored characters and superhero antics to make it palatable.
But it's like you say that this episode really pushed the boundaries. But I think what makes it just about acceptable is it did it for a reason. I actually think that this episode, when viewed with parents watching along with their children, would have seen, holy cow, this is a much deeper. I mean, the kids probably will just look at the action and whatever else and look past everything else. But when you think of characters like Firefly being poo-pooed from season 1 and only appearing in season 3 because it was deemed too violent and too dark and whatever else. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm sure I'm not. Is this the first episode we have with actual red blood in it? Because I don't remember ever seeing that in any of the other episodes, and it is graphic, it is there, it's in your face, particularly after the smack and after the throwing her out of the window. Am I wrong? I don't recall ever seeing blood in this show before. Not like that, anyway.
Phantasm.
Yeah. But that's going for an older
That
viewer
was a movie
anyway.
Theatrical release. Yeah, it wasn't a TV.
I feel like
episode,
there
yeah.
might have been times when people like wipe their nose or wipe their forehead or something, but I'm struggling to remember precisely.
Yeah.
It's little things like that. I mean, let's lighten the mood up a little bit to the scene where she finally has enough. Now, in the comic, it's one of my all-time favorite sequences because it's literally 4, maybe 5 pages where not a single word of dialogue is uttered. When Batman drags the Joker back to Arkham, her face, her appearance, the look of hate on her when she looks up at Batman, all that is just masterful storytelling by Paul Dini in the comic book. Of course, this is a visual medium. It's a show with actors. They added a line or two of dialogue for it, but it's every bit as powerful. Now, guys, this translation, tell me about the things you think worked best comic book to TV and things you think may have been a little bit not so great.
I think there was one clear difference between the way that sort of montage of the Joker getting caught into Harley taking the change. I think there was one difference that they made in the show compared to the comic that I actually think was more effective. In the comic, we see pretty much a full-page spread of Batman dragging the Joker in by the scruff of the neck. But Joker's very clearly, his suit's torn up and he's like bruised and beaten. In the comic, so is Batman. But in the show, Batman was spick and span. I like that better because...
Well spotted.
I like that better because it just sort of shows that the Joker was no threat to him, and he didn't get a single like tear in his cape or what have you. So that just shows a level of like clean sort of aggression with mastery to it that would make Harley hate him even more, because oh, look at him, he's just like, he's there and he looks immaculate, but he's roughed up by a pudding like this. I hate you. So that change was quite noticeable for me, but I think it had a really good effect.
I'll pose that statement back to you with a question.
That's weird.
Is it because of an unreliable narrator?
Maybe.
Exactly.
Honestly, maybe. I think
she didn't even look at Batman when he's dragging in like Joker sort of thing. Like she sees he's beaten bloody to a pulp, whereas she has this perfect image of Batman and what a horrible demon he is in her head. So
then again, yeah, not like this is me. Not I love the idea, but also she might have still seen Batman beaten up because she believes in the Joker to put up a fight. Because most of the time, Batman does look immaculate. Most of the time, the Joker isn't a physical threat to him. That's why he's such a great antagonist. So it works both ways. I like your reading though, just the fact that she didn't factor him at all, and that he's just like leveled out the Joker like that. Yeah, I think it works both ways, but it's a good thing to think about.
What about you, Brad?
Yeah, and it keeps the focus on Harley too, and not on the fight. And I think that's important too. And it is kind of her seeing that revelation. She, when she was first upset, she said she blamed Batman, not even the Joker. And seeing the scene and the unreliable narrator, seeing him rug back to Arkham, I feel like I see more of a light going off in her head. And I think it is effective that they made that particular change where he's not beat up.
Brilliant. What about you, James?
I think the scene is one of the most important in the episode, because when she says it was 3 weeks he was out, 3 weeks, and there's a newspaper that's body count rises. Joker's
which she's ignored.
She ignores that. Then he gets brought back in, and she's obviously crying, wailing, like, "What have you done to him, you mobs?" like that. Which, if a doctor in a high security prison mental facility was doing that, you never see her go back to work after that. So it's safe to believe maybe someone saw that and goes, "Harley, you've got to stop. You've got to let you go. Like, you're fired or you're out." Like, and then that's it. Like, so that sequence of events over a 3 week period, pretty much, she's worried about him. She's completely like rose tinted glasses, everything he does. Even though he's murdering people, then she's like, "Oh, he's back, thank goodness." Batman brings him in, beaten, bloodied, and she goes to him like to comfort him, and they're like, "Whoa, what are you doing? This guy's got razor blades in his gloves and everything." Like, they pull him apart. Like, I think in the comic, there's more of them pulling her off, whereas in this one, she's kind of just crying, whereas in the comic, she's like kicking and screaming. But then never goes back to work, straight out for a rubber chicken with a brick in it. Like,
incredible. Absolutely incredible. And that leads, of course, to the famous classic, now hardly worn but legendary black and red uniform. And I love the little references when she breaks into the store to steal it, that some of the costumes there are slightly adapted. Like, there's a Superman one, a Santa one, I think it's a 60s Mr. Freeze, possibly Captain Cold. There's one that's a cross between the Wonder Twins and Adam Strange, and a Robin Hood, and of course Harley Quinn. Now, to me, they're all characters, particularly Captain Cold and Robin Hood, who Captain Cold went from villain to hero for a brief time in the comics. Robin Hood was a man who stole from the rich to feed the poor, seen as an outlaw by the government at large, but becomes a hero. Is this me reading too much into it, or is this a foreshadowing of Harley's possible future life? I mean, let me know your thoughts, Adam.
I feel that the character was still such a fresh experiment of the show that it's impossible to tell if that was the intention. I'd love it if it were. But then again, think back to when us, the viewers, have been seeing this character. Her first appearance, she was a particularly skilled aide to the Joker. And then she immediately splits with him and goes to Poison Ivy. So there was always the element of the anti-heroics there. We've talked about that in previous episodes. So if that's something that Paul Dini was either like thinking of or hoping for this character, then maybe that's welcome. But I was very interested to that lineup of costumes as well. I think those costumes are sort of more of an indication of realism within Gotham City. It's just the kinds of things people would want to dress up as for Halloween in a world full of superheroes.
Yeah.
What about you, Brad?
Yeah, I agree with Adam, but it's a little bit of fan service. But also, it could be that when he was writing this episode, he realized he was onto something with this character, that there's something deeper going on, and maybe that was just a way to tap into that and the possibilities. Because I think it would be impossible to write an episode like this and not realize that there's something deeper going on with this particular character, and maybe the impulse to write it, the inspiration to write it, within that's what he realized, wait a minute, this is going to be bigger. We can do a lot more with this character. Let's throw these things in. So I think it might be a little bit of mix of both.
Very good. James?
Like you mentioned Mr. Freeze, and the first thing that came into my head before we talked about Captain Cold was Mr. Freeze. Can you think of another character who's done terrible things for love? Would be Mr. Freeze.
There you go. Exactly that.
And then, if you're really grasping at straws, Robin Hood, did he fight the good fight for Maid Marian as well, like outlaw? But that I feel is a bit of a push. But like when we mentioned Poison Ivy a couple of times, she wasn't in the Arkham cells in the comic. It was a bunch of line-drawn weirdos with one just muttering under his breath, "Die." Whereas in the cartoon, now that they've
including editor Mike Carlin, he was in one of the cells in the comic book as well.
Oh, was that just a dig? Why was he put in there?
No, because he's just that kind of guy that everyone thinks is a crazy genius, and he's an amazing guy. He was also cast as Mastermind in the terrible trio, Professor Mastermind and Mr. Nice, with Archie Goodwin and Denny O'Neil. The three editors of the Batman group of comics were all villains that appeared in issues 10, 20, and 30 of the original run of Batman, the Batman Adventures. So seeing Mike Carlin there for me was just like great fan service. But the viewers of the show would never have picked that up. I did because I'm a nerd.
I also thought, going back to the censors, the prisoner licking the cell was kind of, how did they get that past the censors? That was pretty.
That was a bit multiple Migs from Silence of the Lambs, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
I think
that's exactly what I was thinking of. Yeah.
But then again, I think that's a little niche reference of just to the kids. They would just think, oh, that dude's really, really weird because he's in a crazy person hospital. But then the grown-ups would be like, oh, okay, cool. So maybe Hannibal Lecter's downstairs. Who knows?
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, let's think back because, it was only a couple of days ago when Adam and I recorded episode 95, which features the Joker without Harley, with the boys, Bud and Lou, the hyenas. And of course, here they are. And they go to Harley's side. They're not Joker's pets. Is that telling that even though she is also at times a murderous psychopathic clown, that inside she's trying not to be? I mean, let's not forget, I don't know which version of the comic you guys have got, if you've got the original issue from 98 or if you've got like one of the trades. The intro for the trade by Paul Dini said he had to create an origin for Harley Quinn because he was getting really disturbed by the fans who were saying, like you said, James, earlier, how great this relationship was, how she always stuck by her man no matter what. And he's saying, what are you thinking? This is not what I'm trying to tell you at all. I want to show you that she's a victim. And the poor thing keeps getting lured back in. I mean, what do you think of that whole thing, Adam?
I think ultimately anyone who says, oh, relationship goals, they're plainly people who have never read a comic in their life and just haven't read between the lines. That aside, I would say it's really telling that in this episode, the hyenas are scared of the Joker and the way he treats her. Animals have a natural intuition. They don't see faces. They don't understand language. They get all emotional cues. So the fact that they react that way just shows how strongly they bonded to her. And let's not forget, even though she may have fudged her grades some way or somehow, she still got her degree, got her doctorate, is a trained psychotherapist, so she has to be able to empathize somehow. She does care for these animals, so they care for her back. Whether or not that still rings true the whole way through is something I hope for.
Brad?
Yeah. And the hyenas kind of looked at her when she was talking about, oh, why doesn't he love me, kind of, and they were like, what? They're like, they even saw it. I thought that was just like
Well
a quick
spotted.
Yeah, it was a quick little shot, but I think that was, to me, that was very effective.
Really powerful.
Yeah.
James?
I'm thinking about the very last panel in the comic and the very last line of the episode. They're different because in the comic, she's being asked, how did it feel to be, and she says it felt like a kiss when she's in bandages and traction in her bed. And then when she sees the flower that he's left saying feel better soon, but then she's narrating the episode and she says he'll always be toxic, evil, like horrible, and then she ends it, sees the flower and goes, and those two differences, like saying it felt like a kiss, like being beaten up and thrown out of a fifth floor window and being just completely turned upside down, felt like a kiss, or cartoon, all of those things, beaten up, thrown out of a window, abused, and she still sees him as an angel. Like, she's not okay. She is not okay. And it takes, I'd say, years after the comic for her to finally be okay. Like, if you look at like TV shows now, like Harley Quinn, the animated series, where she rips him apart. Like, it's made for adults, but she talks like psychotoxic, murderous ex. Like, and she's in a healthy relationship with Poison Ivy. But like, how far have we come from her being the background like goon to being his like love of his life, which if you go to again the David Ayer Suicide Squad movie, he saves her and she betrays the Suicide Squad to go for him. She's still in love with him, to the modern day where everyone knows she's better off with Harley and he is the worst. So I'd say this episode probably inspired more stories about her than anything else ever.
Yeah, it's hard to argue that. But I want to go back to one of the points you made about her fudging the grades and stuff in the comic book, which wasn't translated to the episode. Because when she was introduced into actual full DC continuity a couple of years later in No Man's Land in the Batman Harley Quinn special, they've maintained, and it's been a constant thing ever since, that she is a genius. She is a psychologist. She is super smart, but she was just smitten and not even borderline, full-on Stockholm syndrome with the Joker. She was at his beck and call, in his thrall. But like you brilliantly said, James, in the Harley Quinn animated series, she finally escaped. And that was the cartoon I've been waiting decades to see, because it happened in the comics years before, in Paul Dini, of all people's Detective Comics run. And that's when she took that step from being villain to anti-hero, a position she holds to this day. Now, guys, what did you feel that transition between the victim that we see that breaks our heart in this episode to the Harley of today? Adam?
There has to have been... There's usually an accumulation of so much trauma in toxic abusive relationships like this. Eventually, hopefully, in most cases, it's not always the case, that the victim hopefully starts to understand and realize where this comes from and eventually starts to break herself away. I don't know which story it is, but I remember reading an excerpt of where Harley Quinn was having a fight against Black Canary, but Black Canary has to stop the fight because she's going through symptoms of morning sickness. And then she talks about particularly dark instances she had with the Joker. I won't go into too much detail for the sake of our viewers, but moments like that, just when it's put there in your face, has good shock factor, but still emphasizes the level of trauma and hurt and destruction she's gone through. So the sooner moments where she breaks and goes her own way, the better. And I think a lot of the combination of that independence plus her clear level of genius was also shown quite well in the Kathy Yan Birds of Prey movie. Because
definitely. She
was spent that movie completely independent. We only see Jared Leto's body double for a split second, and we see her accurately psychoanalyzing pretty much every character around her. So that version of Harley Quinn is something I think we need to see a lot more of.
Well said. What about you, Brad?
Yeah, if you look at her early appearances on the series compared to, say, Joker, Harley, Criminal Insanity, and the Harley Quinn animated series, and Margot Robbie's interpretation of the character, to get from where she started to where she is now, this is the episode that really started her on that journey. So I'll say it again: you can't underestimate or overestimate the importance of this episode. I think obviously to the character, but also to DC, the DC universe as a whole.
Brilliant, James.
That part in the comic, the origin, like she comes straight out of college. It shows she's a gymnast, so a little bit of background, so she can do the cartwheels and everything. And then it shows though she's just out of college and into Arkham. She's got the PhD. How old can she realistically be when she gets there? To think that she may be early 20s is even more scary. And then also, since it's a character that was created in the 90s, it's safe to say that some of us here, actually between us all here, we've read every single comic book appearance she's ever had. And
I have.
There you go. And like Adam mentioned, the growth, the progression that, like in Death of the Family in New 52, Joker kidnaps Harley in the Suicide Squad issue, chains her up in what seems to be like a tomb, surrounded by skeletons all dressed like Harley Quinn, saying she wasn't the first, which hopefully is a mind game because we
horrible
first. But then she gets out of it by like ripping the chains off of her own wrists, like nearly killing herself. That's how she's willing to survive getting over him. And that, for me, that issue was a bit of a tipping point because they built it up that she would still be victim to him. Are you still vulnerable to the Joker? You're going to betray us. And then after that, like he said, you're not special. Like, look at all these bodies. And then what you mentioned, Brad, with Joker, Harley, Criminal Sanity, her as a criminal psychologist, tracking down all of these the Joker murderer and the copycats. And that was probably one of the best Black Label books that DC put out. And I remember a splash page of her with the photo wall, with the yarn, the strings, and the threads. Like, that is a character that originated from a children's cartoon.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, it toes the line very well.
Those quotes are very important because if it was, I almost feel like this was maybe pitched as a kid show, and they knew kids were going to be watching it, but they knew from the beginning that they were going to try to get more into it. And here we are. It's become so iconic for the character. Like I always say this about the series is that it introduced a lot of people to the characters. A lot of people that are working in comics now got their start by getting turned on to the animated series. They didn't even go to the comics. So that proves that this was definitely more than just kid stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, guys, so far, obviously, I've been asking a lot of questions and basing the show on my perspective, but I want you to talk to me about Harley Quinn, Arlene Sorkin, and this story, and how you feel this story fits in with all three. Adam?
I think we've touched on really well about the story, about the quality of Arlene Sorkin's performance, and how necessary it was just to get the Harley Quinn official origin story, because this character has become like one of the main pillars of DC and one of the main pillars of female characters in comics. I suppose I think the main note that I put in my own notes while I was watching this episode is that their story took too long to tell. But then again, given the emotional weight of it, I think it came at the right time to be palatable to most viewers. I think if it had come too early, it would have been a little bit shocking, and we didn't have the necessary sort of framework to tell it sincerely and without it being too much for certain viewers.
Yeah,
Brad?
I've stated that, you know, how important this particular episode was for the character. And I think almost everything started with this episode. You know, I think everything else wasn't certainly wasn't throwaway, but you didn't realize the depth that you could really explore. And that episode is really important. And you wouldn't have that if it wasn't for Eileen Sorkin's performance. There's that scene where she takes off her not helmet, but her hat, I guess, and you see her as a human, not as Harley, and that wouldn't have been as powerful in the episode if it wasn't for her performance. And I was going into this episode, I was really blown away, and it made me realize again how much we lost. It's just sad to think that we've lost both Eileen and Kevin Conroy in the course of a little over a year, I guess. But yeah, I'm surprised after watching this episode that her name wasn't more well known. I mean, maybe I wasn't reading the right things or whatever, but she should be in the pantheon of great voice actors after this episode.
No doubt. Absolutely. How about you, James?
Oh, so much to talk about. With Arlene's performance, has now her legacy has lasted longer than her own life. Like, think of every performance of Harley Quinn, from Tara Strong, who replaced her in the Arkham games, to Margot Robbie, to Kelly Cuoco. They all have the element of the Mr. J, the is it New Jersey accent, and that came from her. That she gave birth to that performance. And in her first, up until this episode, we never heard her talk out of character in that accent. Like at the beginning of this episode, when she says, "Call me Harley, everyone does," that's the first time you hear her speaking with a somewhat normal voice. And then in the scene that Brad mentioned, when she's saying Joker's gone too far, and she takes off the headpiece and the mask, which I'd also like to say is genius. They did it in a black and white video because you don't see the white face makeup. So you see her take off the mask and the headpiece, and you see her hair, but you don't see her with the Robert Pattinson makeup smears. But that voice that she does on that video isn't the original voice, isn't her Harley Quinn voice. It's in between. So is this part of her now seeing what was before, seeing what was, and seeing what will be? All in the space of one episode, you have three very different voices for the same character. And it's just all from one woman who is no longer with us. And it's just so sad that she never got the recognition. Like, people at Comic-Cons would say to her, like, how magical she was, how wonderful it was. And like ultra nerds like us knew that she was the one who started the character. But now it's just so much more, like, yeah, all from a wonderful, wonderful actress.
Yeah, incredibly bittersweet. For me, this is a character that stuck with me from her first appearance. To have the Joker with an actual hench person that lasted more than one episode, more than one comic, is like unheard of. Even Bob the Goon, who was a wonderful creation, got shot by the Joker before the end of his first movie. Jackanapes, the little guy from Gagsworthy. Harley has been around for over 30 years. And that's testament not just to how brilliantly written she was, but I truly believe because of the actresses, starting with Arlene Sorkin, who did it first, who brought her to life. This wasn't a two-dimensional animated character anymore. They breathed life into this character the same way Kevin Conroy did with Batman, Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. did with Alfred, Bob Hastings did with Commissioner Gordon. To me, even though we've had live action portrayals, this show is still outside the comics. Adam and I say this every single week. The best interpretation of Batman outside the comics ever, because of these stellar talents and the writing and direction and production of this show. I mean, Adam, would you go down the same route with that?
Most definitely. I would say that, I mean, this character has gone on to such a huge legacy in comics. I think we've talked about the various pillars of DC. Obviously, the main trio, now Harley Quinn, and to some extent, I know you'd argue that Nightwing is definitely one of those characters that sort of props DC up.
We definitely would.
But she came from this show. And she wasn't expected to be so big as she is. I don't think anyone does. I think a turn of phrase I kind of live by is the phrase "big things have small beginnings," and Harley Quinn had kind of a small and unexpected sort of origin, but then went on to become something really big, really important, and inspired a lot of imagination. And this isn't where she started, but this made her what she is, so that she can continue to have these kinds of stories. And we have to thank one strong performance as well, because unintentionally, another great performance of Arlene Sorkins that I remember is probably one of my favorite Fast movies ever, Oscar, starring Sylvester Stallone.
First time I saw her.
Yeah, and she played a very similar sort of character, sort of like a very pretty face, sort of fawning over a mobster type who didn't really appreciate her, but still had the same sort of squeak there. So clearly, Arlene probably has had the experience to play that kind of character, but she turned that and put something new to it so that this character could become so immortal, but still gave us the performance we need to see her as nuanced and layered and deep, so that we could see it in the other voices and the other ways that she thought. So all of it just came together for something truly historic.
Well said. Brad?
Yeah. Again, it's just it's incredible, her legacy and how it's not as well known as someone like Kevin Conroy. And it's funny because this episode comes up, if you talk about the animated series, this episode is one of those episodes that is, I'm going to use that word again, iconic. It's one of the top episodes that everybody says. And reason why is because of her, because of Arlene's performance. I mean, Kevin Conroy wasn't in it that much, and I love the Jim Gordon part in the beginning. It made me realize how much of an influence that his performance had on the Jim Gordon that we get in the Harley Quinn animated series. And I got a kick out of that because Jim Gordon's one of my favorite characters in that series. So that made me kind of laugh a little bit. But I mean, she just has so much heart and soul in this performance. I mean, we could talk for hours just about that.
James?
I will go back to what you said about this being the best, like, after the comics interpretation of Batman. With how many other mediums and medias have there been where characters outside of the comics have been introduced and then introduced into the comics? Like with this series, you have Grey Ghost, you have the Phantasm, you have Harley Quinn, Terry McGinnis. Like the list grows and grows and grows.
Roxy Rocket.
Yeah. And I cannot think of anywhere else where that's been the case. Like the big budget movies, like you think maybe Bob the Goon will have appeared in the comic somewhere, but like pales in comparison to what this series introduced.
Absolutely.
And even then, Bob the Goon was only a character that Jack Nicholson insisted having because the dude was his best friend. Yeah.
Also factual. Now, we talk about obviously Arlene's performance, and we know there's not a lot of Batman in this one, but what Kevin Conroy we get is 10 out of 10. Now, tell me if you don't think one of the scariest moments in this episode is Batman's laugh, because I'm sorry, that gave me shivers down the spine, and the way he is beaten, he's dizzy, he's upside down. Harley Quinn got him good, but he still outwits her into calling Joker. Kevin's voice and the way he delivers the few lines he has in this episode are masterful.
Definitely. It's part of his skills to be able to know how to handle these things. Because sure, he can't escape those chains physically. Like by the time he gets one arm free, it's probably been torn off by those piranhas. So he's really boned here. So he uses a very underappreciated skill and sort of the same tactics that a hostage negotiator would, almost, and just sort of like appeals to his hostage taker's interests. So that was how he handled things. But yeah, Batman laughing and that sort of grandeur and gusto, and just think of the end of The Killing Joke.
Oh yeah,
That's the only thing I can think of.
Good one.
Because there's something so inherently sinister there, because he's meant to be straight down the middle, lateral, logical, cold, analytical. So him doing that, and there was, and again, just circling back to Arlene Sorkin's amazing performance, there was genuine fear and discomfort there.
Yeah.
She expressed how weirded out us viewers were, which was very needed. Yeah.
What about yourself, Brad?
One of the big conflicts between Joker and Harley, or one of the reasons why Joker has problems with Harley, is that she's smarter than he is. Her jokes are better. He makes people laugh more than he does, and that kind of drives him crazy. So a lot of this episode was her outsmarting Joker, and then she outsmarts Batman. But that laugh is, you realize that, wait a minute, Batman's the one who outsmarted everybody, and he takes control and knows how to play the mind games. And again, that laugh, Steve, we talked about that clip from the Kevin Conroy documentary on the DC News podcast yesterday, and he talked about how he had to go to those dark places to get that voice, and that laugh is definitely coming from a dark place, but it's so super effective.
James?
See, I don't know why. Probably because it's the voice that I could fall asleep to. The laugh didn't stress me out, didn't creep me out. The next line did. He goes, "You little fool." When he says that, that's when I get the chills, and I get, ugh.
Yeah.
That's really not like you to say to like, that's that really like messes me up. The laugh, I'm like, okay, that's a bit out of place. But then as soon as he says that, because it's Batman, it sounds like being mean, I guess. And I'm not used to that. Like, obviously he calls people psychotic and beats people to a pulp. Verbal abuse is where I draw the line.
Yeah, it's not something I thought about. Makes sense though.
That's brilliant. But that's brilliantly said, James. Is leading me on to my next point like a star. The hive mind is in full effect with the three of us, four of us. This is the wake-up call. This is where Batman shows Harley, I want to help you. You are misguided. You've been misled. You've been duped by a psychopath. And the way he regales Joker's stories back to her shows that he knows exactly what he's talking about. And it is brilliant writing. Absolutely brilliant writing. This may have been a comic that looked like an episode of the animated series. But this, for me, like you said, Adam, along with The Killing Joke, ranks amongst the greatest Joker stories of all time, and still ranks amongst the greatest Harley Quinn stories of all time. Hence why 30 years later, they're still doing new collections and putting it in trade paperbacks and graphic novels. So the psychology, and we always say that comics are an art form that are greatly misunderstood and underappreciated. The layer of storytelling in Batman, for me in particular, this show with these characters, it's incredible, absolutely incredible. Right, so some last thoughts. Anything else you want to add about Mad Love, guys? Adam?
It's hard to talk anything further. We've summed it up so well, I'd say. This is a story that needed to be told because, like, this character sort of gathered everyone's attention and imagination so clearly that we had to wonder where she'd come from, but it had to be told now so that the audience was ready for it. So everything added up to something really remarkable and really, really powerful.
Brad, go nuts.
Yeah, it was an episode that hit at the right time when it needed to, and it's good that it wasn't rushed out early in the series, because this is obviously something that was thought a lot about. It was Paul Dini put a lot of thought into this, and this is, you know, like we were saying, this is not Bonnie and Clyde. This is a abusive relationship. So we gotta show that. And good on Paul Dini that he realized that people could take it. That he wasn't like, oh, I don't think people are ready for this. No, he went and he told a story that he had to tell at the right time, and I think that's why it's still so beloved by fans.
James?
I love the episode. I love the story. My only question would be, where did Harley Quinn get that robot Joker that she used to distract Batman?
I want one.
Do you really?
One with the soundboard that shouts "Traitor!"
He's probably said that to countless goons over his years, and she's just got it all on tape. Yeah, I mean, he's so famous for hacking into broadcasts.
It's true. I just remember that way.
Other than that, where did she get the robot? It's such a perfect way to introduce a character that, like, we have Deadpool, we have the breaking the fourth wall, even She-Hulk breaks the fourth wall, and they're the crazy characters who kind of started out bad and then go good, and Harley is her own thing, and I wish in TV, movies, everywhere, they would keep Harley as Harley. There is so many layers that we've talked about in 1 hour that haven't been shown well enough in other medias, that they don't need to start copying other characters.
Yeah, well said. For me, the takeaway that resonates still, other than how did this episode get broadcast, because it still blows my mind, because it is as adult, as grown up, and as layered as anything live action, if not 10 times more so than most things, is the line she says when they find her broken body on the floor after falling out the 5th story window, and she says, "It's my fault, I didn't get the joke." Breaks my heart. And if that doesn't show the fans that love the Harley Joker relationship how toxic and almost hypnotized she was, what does? But for me, it's one of the best lines Paul Dini's ever written, and it just works fantastically on the printed page and in the animated adaptation, which is one of the finest ever committed to film, as far as I'm concerned.
Definitely.
Right, so last thoughts before we head off into the wild blue Gotham yonder. Adam.
Just trying to think. We've had such a fruitful discussion about this excellent episode. I think... Yeah, I'm just going to reiterate what I said a little earlier ago. This is an important story to really define a character that we've all been curious about. It's a story that needed to happen and came to us at the right time, handled with perfect performances, and has made the character the legend that she is today.
Yeah, great performances, great writing, a good message. Well, maybe not necessarily good, but an important message. Yeah. It's stories like this why people like us keep coming back to comics. This is something that we can point to those people who aren't fans and say, this is why we love that stuff. And it's an incredibly important, not only episode of TV, but a very important piece of comic book culture.
What about you, James?
Arlene Sorkin's performance in this one is outstanding. The concentrated doses we get of Kevin Conroy are, as usual, perfect. Mark Hamill gets to stretch his legs a bit with his normal voice as a dentist, his Joker voice, followed then by his psychiatrist voice when Harley's confessing love for him. it's an outstanding, perfect episode that I've shown to many people out of context of Batman the Animated Series many times. And you can't really do that with many like animated shows or even superhero movies. Like how many Marvel movies would it take to make sense of the latest one? Stuff like that. This is just a perfect little isolated origin story that has influenced the character so much that she's going to be appearing in a musical Joker sequel next year with Lady Gaga. And it all started with Arlene Sorkin in Joker's favor.
Yep.
That was it.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, because I was going to say that this is probably a story that we're going to see told again in the Joker movie that's coming out. And I just wonder if they're going to grab any lines from this episode. The I didn't get the joke line, or call me Harley Quinn, everybody does those things. It'll be interesting to see if they bring that in. But I think we're definitely going to see the stamp of this episode in the new Joker movie.
I mean, knowing Todd Phillips, his first Joker movie had so many callbacks to the comics that I'd be stunned if a few of them weren't in there. So let's keep hoping. So that's it. Episode 100, guys. I cannot thank you enough. You've made this something really special. 25-minute animated show that is pure art, and like Brad and I frequently say, written like pure literature, because it is. It's a fact. Paul Dini, Bruce Timm, and Butch Lukic have created a masterpiece. It's the 22nd episode of season 3 of Batman the Animated Series, and immediately, and this is a confession, as most people probably know, with season 3, I have not seen it before. I have never seen this episode before today. I've read the comic 1,000 times. But this is the first time I've seen this episode, and I was blown away. So, until we meet again, guys, my brothers, my cub, tell the universe where they can see your face, hear your voice, and read your work.
I do many things across the great wide interwebs. For more Batman and DC Comics flavored things, look no further than Dark Knight News. I review multiple titles a month. Catwoman and Batman Beyond are in excellent spots right now, as is the delightful and surprising Gotham War, the great crossover event. But as for my one true love, PC and tabletop gaming, look no further than Our Pride and Joy, fantasticuniverses.com, where I post blogs and opinion pieces about anything to do with PC, console, tabletop, trading card, and every kind of gaming in between. Talk to me on Twitter at IsItTinker. You'll probably be able to see that somewhere up there, thanks to my mixing work in post to bring this show to you guys here on the DC Comics News podcast. Look to twitch.tv/IsItTinker to find me streaming various card games, including Harley Quinn themed decks on DC Dual Force and whatever other gaming goodness tickles my fancy.
Wonderful. Brad stuff.
You can find me writing news reviews for DC Comics News. You can find me on the DC Comics News main podcast. And when we get back to recording it, the Harley Quinn Mad Love podcast, where we break down the animated series. You can also find my writing on with the movie blog. And you can follow me on Twitter at FlickyB1.
James.
You can read my many reviews on darkknightnews.com. And you can find me rambling into the Twitter, now Xverse, as James Attias DC27, posing theories and harebrained schemes about current comic books and current superhero movies.
But for those who want to see and hear more of James on podcasts and videocasts, now is the time to announce that we are going to be launching Detective Comments, a Batman podcast, very, very soon, where randomly, without rehearsal, we are going to pitch a subject as soon as we start recording and then go from there. Adam's already got his devious little mind working overtime with their subject for their guest episode. So Brad, you have to join us one week, but the first one will be James and I coming very soon to a podcast near you, and it's a Batman podcast like no other, because it's going to be on the fly, unrehearsed, uncut, and probably not very PG in places, but hey, we need to do something different.
The least Batman thing we could do, no prep time.
Oh yeah.
That's why I did it.
I've ever since you guys pitched this project to me, I've been very excited to hear what you guys have to say. I've been sitting on the question I want to ask you both in the forum pretty much since you guys pitched it. So it's like on a post-it note that's looking dusty and sad and scrumpled in my desk somewhere. So I will pitch that to you as soon as we get into the zone. And of course, it'll be mixed and produced by little old me so that it can sound as delightful as it needs to.
Yeah, my first topic is a doozy. James, get yours ready. Brad, get yours ready. Adam, I know yours is ready. So look out for that. This show and every other show on the DC Comics News Podcast Network can be found on Apple Podcasts, put my tongue back in, Google, Spotify, wherever else you find podcasts. And you may see our heroic visages all over YouTube as well. As for myself, just Google Steve J. Ray or Fantastic Universes, or even Steve J. Ray's Fantastic Universes, for all the damage I inflict on the poor unsuspecting internet on a weekly basis on all three websites. DC Comics News, Dark Knight News, and Fantastic Universe can be found on X, where we no longer tweet, we simply excrete, at DKNewsCom, at DC Comics News, and at Fan Universes. But until we return, there's a couple of things that everybody needs to do, and that is to
read
More.
comics and watch
more.
Batman. We're so good at this.
We're
Should
so
we go
good
for
at
that
this.
again? I sprung that on you.
Uh,
If you guys
honestly,
say read more and I do comics and I'll do watch more and everyone says Batman, I think that'll work.
I think there's sort of a merit to the chaos of it. It's very
Actually, yeah, very Harley. Let's keep this in as well as a
Really?
tribute to Arlene. Yeah,
Oh.
as a tribute to Arlene, because she will be greatly missed along with Kevin. And I hope wherever they are in a gothtopia of their choosing, sipping back cocktails and living a wonderful afterlife. I will leave it at that.